Welcome to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. As Grigor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. So wrote Kafka in the Metamorphosis. Now, when you look around you, do you find life imitating this work of art as the human race has transformed itself into a monstrous walking iPad, forcing the evacuation of airports around the world as terrified travelers flee in fear of our hunched and zombified appearance? And our financial markets have transformed into grotesque, unstable, lying vermin? Our housing markets bulbous, deformed, and dangerous? Our political systems, our education and healthcare systems, massive leeches sucking the lifeblood out of all who encounter them? Transformed beyond all recognition? Stacey?
Yes, Max. When we look at the markets or we look at the economic or financial news, wherever it is, whether it's here in the UK and you look at David Cameron and George Osborne saying their latest economic policies, or in America where the American dream has turned into a horrible, horrifying, scary nightmare, everything is, we've suddenly woken up as these giant vermin. And, you know, what made me think of this is that headline about the iPad in Sydney Airport, and that was airport evacuated because man was staring at his iPad. The modern phenomenon of walking like a zombie, transfixed by your smartphone tablet, usually at worst causes you to walk into a lamppost. But on Saturday morning in Sydney, it caused an airport to be evacuated. So apparently a man was walking through the airport just transfixed, didn't even notice that he was disembarking from a plane, but he went back through security, walked into security, wasn't stopped, and people got terrified and fled.
No, the zombie apocalypse is upon us. That's without a question of a doubt. Yeah, it is kind of like Kafka-esque, the transformation, what I call insexualization. We're becoming
You did. You called it that.
Yeah, I coined that term, insexual. So as the human race loses all empathy, you wouldn't imagine ants or bumblebees or wasps to have empathy. They're part of a network distributed insectual system that is swarming to survive. And the humans have lost their egos in a lot of ways. They've given in to the collective autism that is the iPad, that is the network social media world. And as a result, they have self-inzombified.
Is that a new word, self-inzombified?
They have self-inzombified. And the number of days here in London where people are on the street and the zombies are walking into you, and I have no empathy for them. So when I push them into the road or, et cetera, I knock their phones out of their hands, I don't have any empathy for them. I don't see them as humans. I don't care.
Yeah, of course you should be scared of them because they don't notice a lot of things that are going on around them that are even scarier. Now remember, Gregor Samsa in the Metamorphosis or the Transformation, however you want to translate it, and of course it was written in German, which is an untranslatable language really into English. So he was used to his appearance. It was when he finally crawled out from under the bed and went outside and everybody was terrified by his appearance. We seem to have got used to stuff like this in our next headline. This depressing chart shows that the rich aren't just grabbing a bigger slice of the income pie, they're taking all of it. An examination of average income growth in the United States during every post-war expansion from trough to peak in its distribution between the wealthiest 10% and bottom 90% of households reveals that income growth becomes more inequitably distributed with every subsequent expansion during the entire post-war period. This is the chart. Everybody's talking about it. It's from Pavlina Cherneva, an economist at Bard. And it's quite clear. The blue is labor, red is the posh people, the top 10%. And with this last recovery, the last expansion that we're now allegedly encountering, they've actually increased by 118%. So the bottom is losing.
Right. They're taking more than 100% of the available wealth that's being generated from all the quantitative easing and money printing. And so that's not a model of capitalism. That's a model of cancer. So cancer will destroy the host. And that's the problem with people that David Cameron here in the UK, his constituents, his supporters, are those who would be willing to eat the host, eat the economy completely and utterly, and let the whole thing collapse. So this is not even a capitalist model anymore. So it's foolish to say they're to be anti-capitalist, because this is not capitalist. Anyone who should be with common sense would be anti-cancer, and that's what we're talking about.
But from the chart, and we're talking about transformation, there was a deliberate transformation that happened. Decisions were being made that transformed this economic pie into a grotesque, ugly, disturbing pie.
Right, and the transformation over the years has been the transformation of removing risk from the system for those with a certain amount of wealth to game the system. So all gamers, it's all the casino operators who run the City of London or Wall Street, their profile of risk has been changed, call it metamorphosis, if you will. But they're not taking any risk. Goldman Sachs doesn't take any risk. J.P. Morgan doesn't take any risk. HSBC, Barclays, Royal Bank of Scotland, they don't take any risk. They simply grab. They simply glom. There's no risk for them. And if, in fact, they lose something, a penny or a pound, they threaten the government with destroying the economy unless they get another bailout.
This transformation involved all parties to the thing, from the bottom 99% up to the top 1%, all the policymakers. What happened, it was an intentional thing. Whether we realize what the outcome would be, we transformed the system. As the New York Times, talking about this chart, they said that in the paper containing the chart published this month in the Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics, Ms. Cherneva argues that this shift indicates a failure of the approach that governments take to stabilize the economy. The post-war consensus has been that central bank action to cut interest rates should be the key tool to fight economic slumps. And to the degree fiscal policy ought to be used at all, it should be tax and spending policies that boost the economy in aggregate, such as cutting taxes temporarily. So what did David Cameron announce this week at the Conservative Party conference? Well, first of all, he did announce that he resents poor people, and that was evident in his tax cuts. Even the FT says these are absurd tax cuts, because what he's doing is basically giving tax cuts to the rich and cutting services to the poor. And as the data that Ms. Cherneva shows, it's resulted in this ugly transformation of our economy into a system that doesn't work.
Right. He's going to add to Britain's debt. So Britain's debt is approaching 1.7 trillion pounds. It'll soon be 2 trillion pounds. George Osborne very incongruously or ingenuously talks about a reduction in the deficit. The deficit is a meaningless number. The debt of the UK is now approaching 2 trillion pounds, and with these tax cuts, the debt will increase. And the only way that can keep rolling over is by artificially suppressing interest rates down to that near 0% and claiming there's no inflation. Of course, the purchasing power of the pound for the average worker is down 6, 7, 8%. So the average worker is experiencing a depression. There's a depression going on, and David Cameron is giving his blessing to this depression as long as his constituents of posh parasites are fed.
Okay, again, Gregor, he was happy with himself sitting in his own room, and his sister was feeding him, throwing him food under the door, that he could sustain himself. But it was once he heard the music and went out into the other room and he terrified people, that he realized, and that his family said, oh, we have to get rid of this guy. We can't have our son, who is a giant insect, living in our house because he's scaring off their boarders. So he went back in his room and died. So in a way, this is what the FT is tweeting here, is that this system needs to die. It's so ugly. Our current economic and financial system and the income inequality and the distribution of income is so ugly. It needs to crawl away into a room and die. They tweet, income inequality is not just a moral and political issue, it is harming the U.S. economy. Basically, they're saying that you could see that consumption in each of these, every expansion gets worse and worse for the bottom 99%. They're not able to consume, which is what drives economies, because they have no money.
Well, it's like capitalism without failure is like Catholicism without hell, right? So they have a system now in the economy where if you fail in the economy, like so many business people, so many bankers do, there's no penalty. They're rewarded more free money. So as a result, it becomes cancerous, or it becomes the Ebola virus. George Osborne is the Ebola of chancellors. He's the Ebola of financial disease propagation. wherever he goes, the financial Ebola virus follows. And as a result, you end up with zombies on the street who've totally lost all contact to humanity. Empathy levels are nosediving, staring into their iPads, walking off cliffs, walking into telephone poles, walking into my fist on the occasion. I try to wake them up on a one-by-one basis. A good fist to the face usually has a nice impact. I believe it was Mike Tyson who said, yeah, everyone's got a game plan until they get punched in the face.
Yes.
I try to bring that wisdom to the street.
Well, again, speaking of this system that needs to crawl away and die, a lot of people are like Gregor. They're used to what they look like. They just think, okay, I'm an ugly, iPad walking, looking at person, and this system of bubbles and dangerous housing bubbles is what I want. When I was on the boat into the studio today, for example, the article was talking about how consumer confidence is flat, it's stable. And the reason why, they said, was because house prices aren't rising as much as it was before. So they're not so confident that everything is based on their housing prices. And yet, as The Economist now tweets, Britain's economy is growing strongly, but workers are yet to reap the rewards. And they show a chart of median annual earnings among all employees, outturn in projections 1998 to 2007, 2018, and this is RPI adjusted. And as you see, peak earnings was 2004, 2005 at 24.6 thousand pounds. This year, it was 2.8 thousand pounds less than it should have been had we kept our same sort of system and not turned over to bubbles and turned into deformed, iPad walking, looking at scary people.
Well, that's right. The economy is not based on work, savings, or capital. The economy is based on speculation. So people are walking on the street, walking down the high street, looking at their iPad to get the latest trend in housing speculation. Because if their house market speculation is up one fraction of 1%, then they're going to extract that wealth to go buy themselves some more slave-made goods at Primark or some other frickin' high street retailer. And once the house price bubble pops, they're like, wait a minute, I don't work for a living. I have no savings, I have no gold, I have no silver, I have only fiat money that's printed by the bucketful, it's meaningless. Therefore, I am an insect in an insexual world and I have nothing to offer. Why don't I top myself? Which might be the best thing for a lot of people. All right, thanks so much, Stacey.
That would be life imitating the art of the metamorphosis.
Indeed. Boy, these artists, they seem to know what's up. All right, stay tuned for the second half, a whole lot more. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to turn to John Perkins, former economic hitman, who is now an author and public speaker. John, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
It's great to be with you again, Max. Thanks.
All right, fantastic. So I wanted to, before Edward Snowden revelations, before Julian Assange revelations, there was the economic hitman revelations, that there was the IMF, that they were doing dirty things, and they were taking world leaders out to protect the banksters. So let me talk about what's happening in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, where IMF debt, whether in Egypt, Libya, or Ukraine, always seems to follow coups. What's your current thinking?
Well, it's the same old story, except it's ratcheted up several notches. It's this process of basically more than anything, corporations taking over the world. I think really for the first time in history we have a true global empire, and it's the multinational corporations. And the IMF essentially works for the big corporations. The World Bank does, the Pentagon does, the CIA does. The U.S. government it's not an American empire, it's a corporate empire, but the U.S. government is very strongly behind it. And we constantly have these revolving doors where the head of some big corporation becomes the head of becomes president of the United States, or becomes head of the watchdog agency that's supposedly watchdogging oil companies. Well, it's a former oil executive who's going to go back into the oil industry. We're really living in a world that's controlled by what I call the corporatocracy, the leaders of big corporations who also tend to be the leaders of Wall Street and the U.S. government and many other governments too.
What about this idea that there's a cycle that's repeating, but it seems like the public, for the most part, forgets. They don't seem to understand that every time there's a new episode, it's all connected. What's happening today and in these areas around the world, this is connected to what we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years. The empire, as you call it, the U.S. dollar empire. Why is there such a propensity toward amnesia?
Well, I think a lot of that goes to do with the fact that people around the world feel like they're getting better in some respects. So we've got the internet. Everybody's got television today, you know. Everybody's got refrigerators, not everybody, but more and more people. The material things that seem to make life better, that Hollywood tells us makes us happy, are more prevalent throughout the world. So there seems to be this growing prosperity, and yet at the same time, what we're really understanding is that the rich are getting a lot richer. You know, it recently came out that 85 people control more resources than half the world's population, and that you know, we're living in a feudal society, but the people, the bourgeois, the people living outside the castle, are also getting all these little perks. And yet, I also think, Max, people are waking up. I mean, I think we're seeing this around the world. I'm encouraged by what we're seeing. People, you know, really demonstrating against climate change. People demonstrating against Wall Street. I think people are waking up wherever I go. And I've been traveling on the speaking tour for about 10 years since Confessions came out, and I've really seen a change in attitudes around the world. So I think people are beginning to wake up, but we're also getting all these perks all the time that make us feel like we're all getting better lives.
Now, you mentioned you're out there in the public, you're speaking with people, you know, shaking hands with people, and the question is, I want to talk a little bit about how you are trying to affect people or reach people in a different way than just to educate them about the facts. It seems like you're also trying to bring about a consciousness raising. You know, your background going back to the 60s, you were originally in the Peace Corps working with folks, you know, indigenous peoples in South America. And then you started your career as the economic hitman that we know about from your books. But it seems like you're back, you know, maybe into the period of the indigenous people who seem to have something sacred that is missing from today's culture. And so today, when you talk about, for example, shape-shifting, it goes back to these kind of indigenous cultures, and so you see that there's a possibility to bring about in our modern era this has an application as such. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is very fair, and I'm here in London to speak at this conference this weekend on plant consciousness, and which is very interesting. You know, the indigenous people all over the world, and I've studied with indigenous shamans on just about every continent, and they all have prophecies that we've entered a time with the potential for tremendous change. And some of these prophecies go back thousands of years when this time was prophesied, the Mayans, the Quechua, and so forth. And I really do feel that we are going through a consciousness revolution, and I feel that the future may look back on this time as being the greatest revolution so far in history, bigger than the agricultural or the industrial revolution, a consciousness revolution where we're waking up to the fact that we live on a very fragile space station that doesn't have any shuttles, and we need to take care of it. And the fact that we can all communicate with each other, the fact that this program can be instantaneously viewed around the world by people deep in the Amazon, in the Himalayas. That couldn't happen 5 years ago. It's happening today. People are communicating where there's an awakening that's happening, a consciousness revolution, and I feel that, you know, my job, and I feel very blessed to have this job, is to go around the world and announce this.
I'll give you an example of some activism here in the UK. You know, we've been talking a long time on this show about Wonga, which is a payday lender, that at one point was charging annualized interest rates of 5,000%. As a result of our revealing and pushing the near criminality of this company, they were forced now to roll back their work doing this. They're now having to forgive 330,000 people of what are essentially illegal, usurious loan sharking. And so is that an example of what you're talking about? So in other words, this company, which is tied into that IMF system of banking oppression, they're getting their wings clipped. They'll probably be put out of business. A lot of people say that's a bad thing, but your thoughts would be what?
Well, my thoughts would be it's a good thing. I mean, you've exposed something very, very important here to expose, which doesn't mean giving people loans is a bad thing, but it means that they're doing it at those usurious rates. I mean, that's criminals, obviously criminal. And yeah, I think we're at this time when this is becoming a lot clearer. So the fact that we're talking about this, Max, is very encouraging. And a lot of people are viewing this show. We've still got these, like in the United States, we have these major networks like CNN, Fox, and NBC and ABC, who are kind of spewing the party line for the most part. There's some exceptions. But we've also got all this alternative media now. And so I think we're in a classic clash. It's like the feudal lords clashing with the Robin Hoods of the world. We're at this time when there's this amazing clash, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. But what we do know is that there's a growing number of people who are becoming aware and who are becoming activists in trying to change the situation. At the same time, the status quo steps in harder and harder and harder. So the United States has all these draconian laws now. They can listen to everything we say. They can watch everything we do. It's happening in England too, of course. It's happening around the world to a certain degree. And at the same time, there's another whole group of people that's exposing this more and more and more. And I find, for example, in going to colleges and business schools, MBA programs and law programs, advanced programs, that 10 years ago, I would ask the students there, well, what are your goals in life? And they would say, money and power. And today, I don't hear that very much anymore. What I hear is, well, I want to have kids, and I want a better world. I can see that we're creating a disaster here on this planet. We've got to do something to change it.
Have we hit peak bankster?
Probably not. But I think we're also realizing that there is a peak bankster, and that's an important realization.
Okay, let me also add, to put this into historical context, because your book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, was really a seminal moment in this consciousness of raising a movement. And a lot of the work in that book and your work goes back to Latin America, when you were active in Latin America. And now we find that in Latin America, they have a lot of governments that are more in tune with the indigenous populations. They seem to be eschewing the IMF, et cetera. Is that sustainable in your view? Do you think that's going to stick now, that they've kind of rounded the corner and they're now on a self-deterministic path?
I sure hope so. But I think we have to look at historically, why did that happen? So for many years, there's been this undercurrent throughout Latin America of wanting to put down the corporatocracy, wanting to get up from under that. We saw sort of the communist movement back there in the 60s and 70s and so on. But it never quite worked out. And then we had the Chavez situation. So Hugo Chavez becomes president of Venezuela, partly because there had been such terrible presidents before him. And Bush goes after Chavez. There's a coup in 2002. But Chavez survives the coup. He was very, very smart. And the timing was perfect for him. When he survived the coup, Bush couldn't send in the military at that point. He was so engaged in the Middle East and was afraid that we'd lose Middle Eastern oil. The oil companies were all pressuring him not to go after Venezuela because they thought they might need Venezuelan oil. And so in a way, Chavez's timing was perfect. But the fact of the matter is he showed the CIA up to be a paper tiger. And suddenly throughout Latin America, these movements now come forward, and you get guys like Rafael Correa, president of Ecuador, and Morales of Bolivia, and 10 countries then voted in democratic presidents. Countries that throughout most of my lifetime had been run by brutal dictators, many of them put into power or kept there by the CIA. And suddenly all that changed because people felt that they no longer were under the thumb of a totalitarian.
So they hit their peak bankster moment.
They hit that moment. Now, can that be sustained? We know today, I know that today there's tremendous pressure being put on all these presidents. And today presidents are very, very vulnerable. You don't have to take a president out with a coup or a bullet anymore. In many countries, you can take him out with a sex scandal or a drug scandal. And it doesn't even have to be true. These things can be created. I mean, we've seen people taken down. We saw Clinton impeached because of a sex scandal.
We have about a minute left. Just to follow up on that point, how has the financial hitman aspect of things changed? In other words, it seems that given the growth of derivatives products over the past 10 or 15 years, these governments can collude and take down a country as they did in Greece. The Greece was attacked by bankers, and now it's being chopped up. As a result, it was a classic private equity scam. Essentially, we only have 30 seconds, unfortunately, but have the weapons, the financial weapons, increased?
Yes, they've increased. And also, people's awareness has increased. So again, we have this clash that's going on, and I think we don't know what the outcome of the story is going to be. But I think for you and me and people like us to keep exposing this, and for the common man to recognize that we have power. Ultimately, the corporations depend on us to buy their goods and services and invest in them. So we have the power to take back control, and we need to do that.
All right, John Perkins, we're out of time. Thanks so much. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, John Perkins, author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman and many other books. You can find out all about where he's going to be appearing next at johnperkins.org. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.